All right. Yeah, good evening, everyone, and thanks for coming out tonight to this online meeting because it says October 2023, but we're officially in November now, and the weather reflects it. My name is Ian Watson. I'm the senior planner with Upland Planning and Design, and we're working with the municipality of Pictou County on the Imagine MOPC planning project. So tonight, I'm going to go give an overview of what this project's all about. What is Imagine MOPC? Go into a bit of planning 101. What is planning and why do we plan? Because as of right now, the municipality of Pictou County does not have comprehensive planning, so it's a new thing, and you may have experience with it from other communities, but we want to make sure everybody's on the same page. Lydia in the introduction gave some information on how to participate, and I'll go over that again. And then at the end of my presentation, really, we want this to be an opportunity for you to ask questions and provide early comments as we get into the meat of this project. So as I mentioned, we are Upland. I'm here with Lydia. I'm Ian. Also working on this project, we have Paul and Ryan and Ang Herod. And we work with municipalities all around Atlantic Canada, big and small, from 30 people to 300,000 people. I'm actually currently in Newfoundland right now for meetings tomorrow. But our main focus, and my main focus, is typically rural communities or semi-rural communities. So Imagine MOPC is a project to develop a municipal planning strategy and land use bylaw for the municipality of Pictou County. So as I mentioned, there is no comprehensive planning in Pictou County, municipality of Pictou County. The municipality does have a wind energy bylaw that covers the whole municipality, and a subdivision bylaw that governs the subdivision of land and the construction of services related to that. In 2018, the provincial government passed new legislation that requires every municipality in Nova Scotia to adopt land use rules that meet minimum standards, and all areas of every municipality. So previous to this, planning was optional. There were some municipalities that, Kings County, HRM, CBRM, a couple of other municipalities that had comprehensive planning that covered their whole land mass. Some had partial planning. A lot of municipalities had partial planning where they had plans in areas of high growth or areas where there were services or near towns or that kind of thing, but had other areas that were unplanned. And then there was municipalities like Pictou County, Annapolis County, that had no planning at all other than things like wind turbines. So now the requirement is everybody has to have this. And we're talking to the council and in our meetings so far on this project, we're really taking that minimum planning standards to heart. We have an obligation here as a municipality that you need to meet. But by and large, up until this point, things have worked fairly okay without comprehensive planning. Life has found a way, as they say, and so we're not looking to be heavy-handed or go too intense on the planning side of things. Guess I got ahead of myself there. The municipality is unplanned, and there has been, for many years in Nova Scotia, we were talking about decline and shrinking populations, and then in the past couple of years, we've seen a reversal of that. We've seen a lot of growth and pressure for new development, and that is creating a need for planning as we accommodate new homes, new businesses. Thinking about where it's appropriate to put those and how to best grow our communities. In doing all this, the Imagine MOPC project is a really big opportunity for residents, community members to have a say in how and where we grow. And because right now, anything in Pictou County, anything goes, and that can be a good thing. No one's telling you what to do, but that can also be a bad thing, in that no one's telling your neighbor what to do, and they might have ideas about putting a giant factory next to you, or that's an extreme example, but so there's a balance there. So in thinking, in talking with the council and thinking ahead to the next 2 years for this project, or year for this project rather, there's some key goals for Imagine MOPC. One is to recognize the unique fabric of Pictou County. Planning documents, there's lots of things. There are some things that are shared across municipalities, but the whole point of this is to create a plan that reflects what the specific community of municipality Pictou County needs, and having documents that reflect that. And part of that, as we've heard already, is taking a light touch approach, not being overly restrictive, and responding to the local context. So, what that may mean, I could foresee a situation where we are a little more involved. The plans are a little more involved when we look at serviced areas, suburban areas where people are living closer together, where there's municipal investments in terms of sewer and water, where there's more potential for conflict, and so plans might be more involved there. But we can treat that differently than, say, rural areas where properties are far away from each other very often, and there isn't as much need to intervene in that. And this is a opportunity, as I mentioned, to get feedback from residents across MOPC, and use that feedback to shape these documents to reflect that local context. So that's kind of broad strokes what Imagine MOPC is, and but to maybe better understand that, it's worth taking a step back and thinking and asking, what is land use planning? What's my job as a planner? Why do we do this in Nova Scotia? And it's a collaborative process used to help citizens, business owners, and civic leaders envision a common future for their community. So it's about providing that framework that for how our communities are going to grow, how land is used, and how development happens. And the quote, that I always use to sum this up is, if you don't know where you're going, you might end up someplace else. Time marches on, change happens. That's an inevitable. And we can have a hand in how that change happens, or we can let it happen to us. And planning is one of the key tools when it comes to our communities in taking charge of the future and creating the future that we want. More specifically, some of the key things that we look to do through planning is support our community's character, culture, and identity. So identifying those places that are special to us, those cultures that are special to us, and reflecting that in how we continue to build out our communities. And that doesn't also, these two on the screen are physical examples, specific places, Lighthouse and Camp Getty, but that can also be natural places. We have an online survey right now, getting good response to it, and one of the questions asks, what do you value about living in an MOPC? And by and far away, the top answer is access to nature and the rural lifestyle. And so I think that's part of the character, culture, and identity as well that needs to be reflected in these planning documents. It's also about planning is also about preparing for change. It's about thinking what's going to change in the future and how can we be ready for it. And that might mean environmental change, whether it's sea level rise or higher rates of erosion. Also related weather changes, things like we're still recovering from Hurricane Fiona. We've always had hurricanes in Pictou County and Nova Scotia, in the wider Nova Scotia, but the nature of them has changed. It's also about demographic change, economic change. As populations grow or shrink, there's needs for that. As they age, there's changes in the types of housing you need. So how do we build our communities to respond to that? Planning is also about thinking about sensitive environments, the beaches, the wetlands, these specific areas that are more sensitive than others to disturbance, where if you build on them or around them, you can potentially degrade them or destroy them entirely. And very often they're places that we want to have development because we find them attractive, and things like lakes. And so there's a balance there in access to them and not destroying the very thing we want to be on. And then the flip side of that is, very often the environment can be a hazard to humans and their development. Steep slopes, wetlands, again, those coastal areas, floodplains. A big part about planning is thinking about making sure we're not building places where that house is going to get washed away by a flood in 10 years. Another big part of planning is thinking about resource development and making sure that there's ample space for that in our communities. Pictou County has an agricultural heritage, a forestry heritage, a mining heritage, fisheries, and those are still ongoing today. And these kinds of activities are important to the economy and to the culture. And they take up large areas of land. They can be, they're working landscapes. They can be noisy. They can be smelly. They can be dusty. And that needs a space to happen. I used to work in Kings County, and there was very strong planning regulations there in the agricultural areas, partially because people were moving in next to farms and then saying, "Oh, I don't like that the farm's spreading manure," and that was causing problems for ongoing agriculture and impacting their ability to do what they do. So a big part of planning is thinking about how can we protect these essential components of our economy and culture. Planning is also about using infrastructure efficiently, and this is especially important in our serviced communities where we have water, sewer, municipal streets, sidewalks. These are areas that this infrastructure costs a lot of money. It's important. It's an important service that the municipality provides, but we want to make the most of that investment, and we want to be strategic about where we make those investments in the future, so that we don't become unsustainable from a financial perspective as a municipality. This is somewhat related to the resource discussion, but the real roots of planning in North America was the idea of separating incompatible land uses. So there was a day probably where you had, in many communities, where you had the factory town, and you might have lived a block over from the factory that you worked in, and you were okay with the smokestacks in the backyard because that was your source of employment, and it was essential to the heart of the community. I think people's attitudes have changed a lot about that. We still want the factories and the jobs that come with those, and the products that they produce, but we're a little very often people are a little more hesitant about living next to the factory. They want some space between those things, and the same goes for things like livestock. I eat chicken. Lots of people eat chicken. We want that to exist, but not everyone wants to have the chicken barn right next to them. So the ideas of where planning initially came from was like making sure that everything had its place. But the flip side of that, and obviously this isn't an issue in Pictou County because there hasn't been planning, but in a lot of municipalities in North America, I think planning went too far over the past couple of decades. And there's a lot of communities where that idea of separating things means that your traditional main street, for example, is illegal to build. You can't have a house and a business next to each other, so that you can't have the main street where you can walk to get a jug of milk, or where there's overly strict rules about hobby farms and people can't grow food to support themselves. And so a lot of the discussion in planning these days is how do we back off? How do we say that's not necessary? Let people live their lives and let communities evolve organically. And I think that's on the back of our minds, as much as there's no rules to remove here in Pictou County. It's in our minds to make sure we're not going down that route. So that's a bit of the why. In terms of the how, and this is as technical as I'm going to get tonight. In Nova Scotia, we have a piece of legislation, an act called the Municipal Government Act. And I think of it as our toolbox as municipalities and as planners. And in that act are statements of provincial interest in regard to planning. It sets out what a plan can contain and a bylaw can contain and what it must contain. And there are those minimum planning requirements that, that say every municipality needs to have planning. And we take that toolbox and we build, or we draw up a blueprint for the community. And that blueprint is the municipal planning strategy. It's the high level vision, it's the goals, it's the policies, it's the why we did what we did, and it includes a lot of that context, and it includes guidance for council and future councils in thinking about, what was it at that time that the community wanted to guide their work. Out of this blueprint, we build the community through the land use bylaw. The land use bylaw, or the zoning, the regulations, it's the rules for where and how development happens. And a key thing is the bylaw has to agree with the plan, and the plan has to be consistent with the act. So how that might play out, for example, this is just an example, but the Municipal Government Act does say a municipal planning strategy must contain statements of policy with respect to housing. And then hypothetically, your municipal planning strategy might say something like, the municipality of Pictou County values and wants to enable a diversity of housing options in the municipality. That's a high level statement. It's pretty broad. And then you would actually put that into practice through the land use bylaw with, for example, a range of zones that permit different types of housing in different areas that and provide for that spectrum. The toolbox is really important to thinking about how we do this, because it includes the tools, the things that we can regulate, and we can't use tools we don't have as municipalities. We're bound by this act. So there are many things that we can regulate through these planning documents, and we may regulate these things. We don't have to. That really comes down to what the community needs in terms of level of regulation and issues that need to be addressed. Some of the common things that the planning documents typically regulate are lot standards, how big a lot needs to be, building placement, things like setbacks from property lines, building size potentially, and the uses permitted on land. So, it's called a land use bylaw. So things like, where is residential appropriate, where is commercial, all that kind of stuff. And then, of course, the processes required for different types of development is typically regulated. Beyond that, we can but don't need to regulate things like signage or the outdoor storage or landscaping or topsoil removal. But again, this all comes down to, what does the community need? So, as we go through this process and we hear what the issues are, we can go back to this list and look at what these documents actually need to contain. The flip side of that is that, if we don't have a tool in our toolbox, we can't use it. And so there are a couple of things. Well, there's an unlimited number of things we can't regulate, but there's a couple that come up over and over again as I talk to communities about planning. People say, "Oh, can we regulate this?" No. So here's a couple of key things that we cannot regulate through these planning documents. One is resource activities. So that's cropping, animal pasturing, quarrying, timber harvesting. We don't regulate the actual activity through these documents. What we can regulate is the related things, the buildings and structures related to that. So we don't regulate timber harvesting, but we can regulate, if we want, where it's appropriate to have a permanent sawmill, for example. Or we don't regulate quarrying, but we can regulate where it's appropriate to have a permanent asphalt plant. We don't regulate the lands below the ordinary high water mark, so that gets into provincial territory and then eventually federal as you go further out off the coast. And then we don't regulate people. So we regulate buildings and the uses, but not who inhabits those. So whether that's based on age or demographics of some kind, or whether it's based on where people are from or live. We don't say that locals can do something versus people who are from away or anything like that. That wouldn't be appropriate for these documents. And we don't regulate motor vehicles. This comes up, things like speed limits and filling potholes and all those things don't get regulated by these documents. And then, kind of a bit more on the how is that it's a really collaborative process. And this is what I love about, this is why I wake up in the morning and get excited about my job and is doing meetings like this, in collaboration with council, staff, planning advisory committees, and then the residents. And community members. That's huge. We're supporting the municipality in this work, and the council ultimately ends up as the owner of these documents, but these are community documents, and they need to reflect that. And the businesses, and then kind of as the holder of the toolbox, the province is also obviously has an interest in all of this and is a partner in it as well. A couple of key things to mention, because this comes up sometimes, is that new planning documents apply to all new development after the documents are approved. But that's a going forward sort of thing. There's this concept of non-conforming in the toolbox in the act. That sounds like a bad thing, but it's a good thing. It's protection for uses and structures that existed legally, and since there was no planning prior to this, presumably everything was legal, that existed legally on the date that the rules changed. So if to give a tangible example about this, if I had Ian's Auto Garage in an area that through these documents we now identified as residential, that doesn't mean that the day the documents go into effect, I have to shut down my auto garage. I am protected by the act as a non-conforming use. There are limits to that. So if I shut down my auto garage for an extended period, the default is 6 months under the act, and we can extend that through the documents, and we often do in the planning documents we work on. If I shut down that garage for an extended period, then I need to conform with the zoning. So I retire, stop running my garage. 5 years later, I sell the land to someone, and they say, "Oh, there used to be a garage here. I'd like to reopen it." That's the case where no, the zoning then comes into play. You've lost that non-conforming status. The other key thing in all of this is, we're just like a business plan. Municipal planning documents are dynamic. They're not set in stone. You don't make your business plan in year one and then come back and then never change it for the next 10 years and say, "Yeah, everything went exactly to plan." That doesn't happen. I'd be shocked to find someone whose business went exactly to plan. And that's the same thing with planning. We make these based on the conditions today, the assumptions that we have today, what people are telling us today, but those things change. And I'm not perfect. We're not perfect. There's going to be things that are missed. And so these planning documents at a minimum need to be fully reviewed every 10 years under the act. But they also get reviewed more frequently than that very often by councils, either because something's changed and council wants to update the documents to reflect this change, or because people have applied. One of the things is, these documents, you can apply as a landowner to change them. If we put zoning in that says this area is residential, and you want to open a business, there's a pathway to approach council and say, "I'd like to have this considered, and can you update your planning documents to reflect this?" And there is a process to that. It takes a bit of time and effort, and so it's not immediate, but those opportunities are there. So this project's been ongoing since the summer, kind of internally, and in the background we've been working on getting up to speed, doing a lot of background research. We've put together a background report that's just in its final stages of approval, and once that's signed off, it will go be available for you to review. We've been touring the municipality, taking pictures, all those things, getting our legs under us, and making sure we have a good foundation for the work that's going to be done. Now we're in the fall. We've launched this project publicly, doing this initial phase of engagement. And this phase is to let people know about the project, get an initial sense of what matters to you, and we want to hear about that tonight, and in your comments on line and on the survey and all those things. We're going to take all of what we hear in this initial phase, and we're going to spend the winter working with council and the planning advisory committee to come up with some initial drafts. And I always emphasize these are drafts at this point. It's something tangible for people to look at and respond to. It's easier to have conversations when there's ideas on the table, but they're all open to change. It's draft, and I don't ever want anyone to think it's not. Kind of late summer into the early fall, we'll be doing engagement on those drafts. We'll be doing another series of public meetings, another opportunity for online comments, another round of stakeholder interviews, that kinds of thing, to see, do we get it right? What needs to change? And also to give people an opportunity to ask, how is this going to affect me? Like, specifically, let's look at my property and let's see what zone is proposed for it and how does that affect me? We'll take everything we hear from that, work with the Planning Advisory Committee to tweak the documents, update them as necessary, to get to a final kind of draft that we would take through the formal adoption process. And as part of that process, there's another round of engagement, a public hearing where people can speak directly to council before council decides what they want to do with the documents. So the current timeline, and this is somewhat driven by the current requirement from the province, is to have planning in place by the end of 2024. We do recognize that there is a municipal election in fall of 2024 in October. So we're looking at timelines right now to see whether we can get it done before the election or whether there will be a need to stretch it out after. We'll see. But for now, the current target is end of 2024. So I touched on this a little bit. We've done background research and analysis and had the public launch with the newsletter spread, the survey, which is available now, the community meetings, and the online mapping activity, which is available now. This is the last of 7 initial meetings tonight. The other 6 were held throughout October in person. This is the online one, obviously, and we are, as Lydia mentioned at the beginning, recording this meeting, the presentation portion of this meeting. So we will put this up on the project website shortly after today. So that will be available as a resource if you want to come back and look at what I've said, or if you want to forward it on to someone else who couldn't make it to one of these meetings, that will be there to watch this again. So that is the project website, www.imaginemopc.ca, and the project email, hello@imaginemopc.ca. We're shortly going to go into a Q&A session, lots of opportunity to ask questions and stuff. But if you don't feel comfortable speaking tonight, or if you're lying in bed tonight at 2 a.m. and you say, man, I wish I'd said that to them or asked that of them, you can certainly shoot us an email. And you've made it on tonight on this digital format, so I assume you're digitally savvy. But if you know someone who's not and they need to get in contact through something other than email, contact the municipality, and they can connect us via phone or whatever it may be. So I'm going to pause for a second. We're going to stop recording. We are going to take notes of the